Okay, so good morning to everyone, and let's start today's lecture. Okay. So before the break, right? In the last lecture, we were basically covering this topic of equivalence between PDAs and CFGs. Right? So we saw that context-free languages, right, can be defined in terms of context-free grammars, right, and then they can also be defined in terms of this push-down automaton. Right? So even though the CFGs and the PDAs look very different, right? So because the CFGs use this recursive formulation, right, in order to derive strings of the language, while these PDAs have a very algorithmic structure, right? So they basically so in PDA, right, you would basically maintain a stack, right, and then process the string one symbol at a time from left to right and look at the stack contents, right? So even though the mechanism of generating strings, right, using the PDAs and the CFGs are very different, they are in fact equivalent, right? So in terms of the language defining power, both PDAs and CFGs are equivalent, and we showed this by basically constructing, right, a PDA given a CFG and a CFG given a PDA. Right? So just to briefly recap, right? So the first construction that we did was that we were given a CFG, right, and then we constructed a PDA such that the language defined by the PDA is the same as the language defined by the CFG. So the way we do this, right, is that given the CFG, right, so we're given a context-free grammar, which means we're given its non-terminals, we're given its production rules, and so on, right? So in the PDA that we construct, we basically simulate a leftmost derivation of the string, right? So given a string in the language that is defined by the grammar, there exists a derivation, right, from the start symbol. Right. So we consider the leftmost derivation, and the PDA is basically going to guess what is the production rule to be used at every stage of this derivation, right? And on the stack, it is going to keep track of the sentential form, right? In particular, the left sentential form that you would get during the course of the derivation. Right? And so this is how we can, so given CFG, we can construct a PDA, right, which accepts the same language, which means that the class of languages defined by PDAs, right, includes the context-free languages. Right? And then in the second part of the last lecture, we showed that the class of languages defined by PDAs is in fact exactly the same as the set of context-free languages. And in order to prove this, we basically said that, okay, if you are given a PDA, right, then I can construct a grammar, a context-free grammar, which is going to accept the same language as the PDA, right? So in particular, we considered the acceptance criteria of the PDA to be empty stack, right, which means that the set of strings, right, that are basically accepted by the PDA will be those which take the PDA from a start state to a state where you process the entire string and the stack becomes empty. So the construction of this CFG basically removes symbols from the stack, right? So in fact, the way it is constructed is that for every stack symbol, right, and for every pair of states, which means for every triple, right, of the form P, X, and Q, right, where P and Q are states of the PDA and X is a stack symbol, we introduce a non-terminal, right, PXQ, right, such that the strings that are derived from this non-terminal are exactly those which take the PDA from the state P to the state Q and removes X from the top of the stack, right? And then then we considered the various production rules, right, that this particular non-terminal PXQ should basically have, right, in order to generate all of those required strings, right? So once we have this PXQ, right, we can then show, right, that the grammar symbol that we're interested in, right, whose strings would be the language of the PDA, is going to be the symbol of the form this Q0, bot, and P, right? So Q0 is the start. This is the start state of the PDA, right? Bot is the start symbol, right? Which means it's going to be there at the on the stack, right, when the PDA begins its execution, right? And P is some arbitrary state of the PDA, right? So we can show that using the production rules, right, of the grammar that we have constructed, if you can derive W from this particular symbol Q0 bot P, then this can happen if and only if there is a sequence of configurations, right? There is an execution of the PDA, right? Where we begin from Q0, W and bot, right? So this is the start configuration of the PDA. And I will reach a state where I would have processed the entire string, right? The state would be P and there will be nothing on the stack, right? So this means that this particular W is going to be accepted, right? So therefore, W is going to be accepted if and only if it can be derived from a symbol of the form Q0 bot and P. Right? So we can prove this using induction in both directions. However, the state P can be anything, right? So therefore, we introduce another start symbol S, right? So this is the start non-terminal for the grammar, and for every state P in the PDA, we introduce this production S to Q0 bot P. Right? So which means that beginning from the start symbol S, right? I'm going to the very first step of the derivation. I'm going to derive one of these symbols Q0. One of these non-terminals Q0 bot P for some state P, and then from there on, right, I will basically derive the string which is going to remove bot from the stack while moving to the state P. So this will be exactly the language of the PDA. Okay. So so are there any questions regarding this construction? Okay. So let's move on to a slightly related topic, which is that of deterministic context-free languages. So so we are seeing that the PDAs, right, is equivalent in terms of language defining power to context-free grammars, right? Which means that the class of languages that is defined by PDAs is exactly the class of context-free languages. Right? But a PDA is non-deterministic. So in the sense that for a given state of the PDA, right, a given symbol and a given stack symbol, there could be multiple moves that the PDA can make. Right? And PDAs also allow epsilon transitions as well. Right? So this non-determinism, right, where you have multiple choices that you can make at every step of the computation, right? In terms of PDAs is powerful, right? Because this non-determinism is exactly what allows us to make guesses, right? And to define any arbitrary context-free language. Right? So if we were to remove the non-determinism from a PDA, right, then what we would get is a deterministic PDA, right? And the class of languages that is defined by deterministic PDAs is called deterministic context-free languages. So this class of languages is strictly smaller than the class of context-free languages, right, as we will see. So as I said, to define deterministic CFLs, we need to define deterministic PDAs, right? So a PDA is deterministic if at every step, right, there is at most one choice, right? Which means that for a given state Q, right, a given input symbol A and some stack symbol X, right, there must be at most one choice of move that the PDA can make. Right? So note that we say at most one choice. So we also allow no choice, right, which means that the PDA can get stuck at some particular state, right, or symbol or stack symbol. Right? So this is not this is something that we did not allow in, for example, deterministic finite state automatons, right? So in DFAs, we said that for every state and for every symbol, there must be a transition that the DFA can make, right? But here we sort of relax that slightly. So we say that there must be at most one choice of move that the PDA can make for any given state, symbol, and stack symbol. Okay. And we also allow epsilon transitions, right? So so this is again another point of difference, right, from how we define deterministic finite state automatons, right? So in deterministic PDAs, we allow epsilon transitions, but in order to maintain this determinism, right, we say that there must not be a choice between using an input epsilon or a real input. So which means that if you are in some state, right? So let's say that you are in some state where the state of the PDA is Q, you are reading A, right? The A is the next symbol that you are going to process, and X is there on the top of the stack. Okay, so this must be so there must be at most one element, right, in this particular configuration, right? And moreover, right, you should not, there should not be a choice between consuming A or consuming nothing, right? So which means that there must not be an epsilon transition, right, from the same state Q and the same stack symbol X, right? So what we are saying is that this, right, this set must be singleton, right? So this can, so this set can be either empty or it can be a singleton. And we are saying that if this if QAX is let's say non-empty, then Q epsilon X must be empty. Right? So in the sense that if right, from if the state of the PDA is Q and the current stack symbol on the top of the stack is X, right? And if there is some transition that I can make for some input A, right, then there must not be a transition. There must not be an epsilon transition from the same state and the same stack symbol that I can make. Okay. So let's define. So this is sort of the intuitive idea of how we are going to enforce determinism in a PDA. Right? So let's define this more formally. Okay. So a PDA P, right, which has all the 7 components, right? So the set of states, the input alphabet, stack alphabet, the transition function, the start state, the start stack symbol, and the set of final states. Right? So this PDA-P is said to be deterministic if and only if the following conditions are met. Right? So these are exactly the same conditions that I mentioned in the last slide. Right? So for all states Q, for all symbols A, which can also include epsilon, and for all stack symbols X, which belong to gamma, right? Delta of QAX contains at most one element. So there must not be a choice, right, for a given state, a given symbol, and a given stack symbol. Right? And at the same time, right, we also allow epsilon transitions, but there should not be a choice between an epsilon transition and a normal transition. Right? So which means that for all Q belongs to Q and X belongs to gamma, right? If delta of QAX is non-empty, for some A belongs to sigma, right? Then delta of Q epsilon X is empty. So which means that, so if I am at a given state, right, and if I see X on the top of the stack, then there must not be a choice, right, between so in the next move that I'm going to make, right, I must either make an epsilon transition, right, or I can consume something from the input, in which case again there will only be a single choice that I can make. So if these conditions are met, right, so in the sense that if these two conditions are met, then the PDA will be deterministic, right? And we can show that for all words, right, or for all strings, right, there exists at most one configuration that is reachable from the start configuration. So since there is no choice at every step of the sequence of moves, right? So this means that there will exist at most one configuration. Right? So if you consume the entire input string W, right, beginning from the start state Q and the start symbol bot, right? Then there can be at most one state that you can reach after consuming the entire input. So again, we say that there exists at most one configuration, right? So because it is possible that you may actually get stuck at some point, right? So that you may not be able to consume the entire input itself. Okay. Okay. So we have already seen an example of a deterministic PDA, right? So the PDA that we constructed for this particular language 0 and 1n, where n is greater than 0, right? So this particular so let's look at this PDA again, right? So the way we constructed this PDA, right, was that for every 0 that we see, right, we are going to push a marker, which is X in this case, on the stack, right? So that the number of markers will be the number of zeros that we have seen. Okay. So yeah, I'm sorry, the connection was lost. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, so the way we construct this PDA was by making by basically counting the number of zeros that we saw, and by in terms of this markers right on the stack. Okay, so this particular PDA is a deterministic PDA because if you look carefully right at every state, for every state and for every symbol, input symbol, and for every stack symbol, there is at most one transition that I can make. Right. So for example, in the state Q, right, which is the start state of the PDA, right, for 0 and bot, there is one transition. For 0 and X, there is one transition. And for 1 and X, there is one transition, right? And there is an epsilon transition. So from the state P, right, there is an epsilon transition, but that epsilon transition is only there on the stack symbol bot, right? So there is no other transition on the stack symbol bot for any other input, right? So for 0 or 1, there is no transition on P. There is no transition from P for the particular stack symbol bot, right? So this means that so therefore this obeys the condition of determinism, which is that at every step, right, we have at most one choice that we can make, and therefore this is a deterministic PDA. So which means that this particular language 0 and 1n is a deterministic context-free language. So the reason that we're interested in deterministic PDAs, right, or in deterministic context-free languages is because so this is a practical significance, right? So in terms of real-world machines, right, or real-world algorithms, you cannot have non-determinism. Right? So all real-world machines are deterministic, and therefore, in principle, right, the class of languages that you can sort of accept or recognize efficiently, right, would be deterministic. Right? And so, in fact, parsers, right, which is one of the main practical applications of context-free languages, right? So a parser is a deterministic PDA, which means that the languages that you can accept using parsers, right, which is the set of programming languages, would also be deterministic CFLs. Right? So the class of languages which are defined by DPDAs, which is the deterministic PDA, is called deterministic context-free languages, and so the acceptance criteria can be, again, right, either of the two, right? So you can either accept by empty stack or you can accept by final state, right? So the DPDA can accept either by empty stack or by final state. So this particular class of languages, right, lies somewhere between the class of regular languages and context-free languages, which means that so every DCFL, right, is a regular, or the other way around, right? So every regular language is a DCFL. Right? However, every DCFL is not a regular language, right? So in fact, the 0 and 1n that we saw, right? So this is not a regular language, but it is a DCFL, right? So it is accepted by deterministic context-free, by deterministic push-down automaton. Right? At the same time, so every DCFL is a CFL, but every CFL is not a DCFL, which means that there are context-free languages for which there exists no deterministic PDAs, right? So you need non-determinism in order to accept those languages. Okay. So right, so as I said, regular language is also a DCFL. Right? So we can very easily show this, right? So we can start from the DFA of the regular language and we can directly convert it into the DPDA. Right? So the way we do it, right, is that we basically just ignore the stack, right? So since the DFA is deterministic, right, which means that if you're given the DFA, right, whose transition function is delta, then in the DPDA, the transition function delta prime, right, is simply going to mimic delta. Right? So if delta of P comma A is equal to Q in the DFA, then delta prime of PA bot is going to be equal to Q comma bot, right? So you're just going to ignore whatever is there on the stack, right? So bot is on the stack, so you're going to pop it and you're going to push bot again. So this means that for every particular state of the PDA and for every symbol, for every stack symbol, there exists at most one transition, right? And there are no epsilon transitions. So this means that this is actually a deterministic PDA. Right? And we can show that the language of this constructed DPDA, right, is the same as the language of the DFA. Right? So which means that every regular language is therefore a DCFL. Now, another interesting sort of property of DPDAs, right, is that this acceptance criteria, right, of empty stack and final state, right, is not the same. So we saw that in a PDA, right, the two acceptance criterions are actually the same, right? Since that if you have a PDA, right, and if you consider its language that's defined by, say, for example, empty stack, right, then I can construct another PDA which is going to accept the same language through the acceptance criteria of final state, right? But you can't do the same thing in a DPDA. So the class of languages that is accepted by empty stack in DPDA is very limited. So it's not even the class of all regular languages, right? So in order to show this, we can define this prefix property. Right? So we say that if you have an arbitrary language L, right, then this language L has the prefix property if there are no different strings X and Y which belong to L, which both belong to L, such that X is a prefix of Y. Right? So you are given this class of, you are given this set of strings, right? So you are given a language L, okay, and you consider two different strings X and Y, which both belong to L. Right? Now, if L has the prefix property, then it cannot be the case that X is a prefix of Y. So which means that if you take a string, right, and that's in the language, then no prefix of that string is also going to be in the language. Right? So let's look at a couple of examples, right? So the 0 and 1n, where n is greater than 0. So this particular language has the prefix property. Right? So the reason is that if you look at any string in this language, right, it's basically going to so it will have equal number of zeros and ones. Right? Now, if you take any prefix of it, right, then any prefix of that string is not going to have equal numbers of zeros and ones, right? So in fact, it will always have fewer ones than zeros, right? So that's why this particular language has the prefix property, right? But if you take the regular language 0 star, right? So this is so 0 star is a regular expression, right? And basically just the strings which have all zeros, right? So this particular language is a regular language, but it doesn't have the prefix property, right? Because obviously, if you take any string in this language, then any prefix of that string is also in the language, right? So that's why this particular language does not have the prefix property. Right? Now, why is it that we are interested in prefix properties? So remember that in the case of PDA, right? If the stack becomes empty, then you cannot make any move, right? So any move that or any transition that you can make in a PDA, there must be something there on the stack. So based on this, right, can anyone sort of figure out the relationship between acceptance by empty stack and the prefix property? Okay, yeah, Vineet.
So empty stack PDA will accept only those languages which have prefix property.
Okay, and why is that?
Uh, because suppose if there are two languages X and Y, like a language Y which has a prefix X, and both of them gets accepted. Like first, like when we want to accept Y, uh, we will go through X,
Yes.
and the PDA will accept X, and after that the stack is empty. And since the PDA is deterministic, you will have to follow this path only, and now there is no more for you to do.
Yeah.
If it is accepting X, it cannot accept anything which has a prefix X.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. So yeah, so that's the reason why any language that is accepted by DPDA through this empty stack criterion is not, it will basically have the prefix property. So yeah, so if a language L is n of p for some DPDA p, so this n of p is the notation that we use for acceptance through empty stack, right? So if some language L is n of p for some DPDA p, then L has the prefix property, right? And this because if you basically accept, so if a string, right, is in L, right, which means that it is accepted by the PDA, then it must lead to an empty stack, right? Now once it leads to an empty stack, you cannot do any more transitions, right, from there. So which means that if you have two strings x and y, where x is the prefix of y, then once you basically process x, right, the stack becomes empty, and then there are no more transitions that you can make, right? And since this is a DPDA, this is the only state that you can reach, and yeah, so that's why languages that are accepted by deterministic PDAs through the empty stack criterion will have the prefix property, right? Which means that 0 star, right? So for 0 star, which does not have the prefix property, you cannot have a DPDA, right? Which accepts it through the empty stack criterion. Okay. So we have compared this DCFLs with regular languages. We have seen the two criterions, right, for DPDAs, right, in terms of the acceptance criterions in terms of empty stack and final state, right? So let's also compare DCFLs with CFL, right? So as I said earlier, right, so CFLs, all CFLs do not have corresponding DPDAs, right, which means that there exist CFLs for which you must, any PDA that you construct will be non-deterministic. So here's a very simple example, right? So if you consider this language, our language of palindromes, right? So W is equal to WR, right? WR is the reverse of W, right? So this particular language cannot have a DPDA, right? So we won't prove this formally, right? But intuitively, right? This is because if you want to show that some string is a palindrome, right, then you have to somehow guess the middle of the string. So once you guess the middle of the string, right, so you will basically, if you're trying to construct a PDA for this particular language, right, then you would basically store every symbol that you see on the stack, right, until you reach the middle of the string, right, and then you know that whatever symbols that you see after the middle, they will basically correspond to the stack, whatever is there on the stack, right? But you need to guess the middle of the string, for which you need non-determinism, right? So that's why you cannot have the deterministic PDA for this particular language. However, there is something more interesting that that you can say about this DCFLs, right? And which is that every DCFL is going to have an unambiguous CFG. So we can show that all DCFLs have unambiguous CFGs. So remember that this concept of ambiguity, right, is that so if you have a CFG, right, then any string in the CFG, any string that you can derive, right, from the start symbol of the CFG, right, if it has multiple derivations, right, in fact, so in particular, if it has multiple leftmost derivations or multiple rightmost derivations or multiple parse trees, then this particular CFG is ambiguous, right? And we saw that ambiguity, right, is sort of not a good property, right? At least in terms of practical applications like parsing, right, where if you want to, so you basically want to express the exact structure of the string that is accepted, right, that is there in the language through its parse tree, right? And if there are multiple parse trees, right, then there are multiple possible structures or interpretations that you can give to the same string, right? So, but we can show that all DCFLs, right, which means that all languages that are accepted by deterministic PDAs, they are going to have unambiguous CFGs. And so this property is very useful, right, because as I said, right, a parser is a deterministic PDA. Right? So which means that if you can actually construct a parser, right, for some given programming language, right, in the form of a deterministic PDA, then you know that that programming language, right, all programs in that language, they're just going to have a single parse tree, right? So the corresponding CFG is going to be unambiguous, right? So the converse is not true, right? So what does the converse say? Right? So the converse says that all unambiguous CFGs are DCFLs, right? So in particular, every language that has an unambiguous CFG has a deterministic PDA. Right? So that is not true. So in fact, the language that we saw in the last slide, right, which is this language of palindromes, W is equal to WR. So this particular language has an unambiguous context-free grammar, right? So which is this grammar that I have shown on the slide. So you can work it out that this grammar is actually unambiguous, right? But as I said, right, so there does not exist a DPDA which is going to accept this language, which means that this language is not DCFL, right? So all languages or all CFLs which have unambiguous CFGs are not DCFLs, but all DCFLs have unambiguous CFGs. Okay, just give me a minute. Okay. So the way we show that, yes, Vineet, you raised a hand.
So we had said that ambiguity is the property of grammar and not the language.
Mm-hmm.
So isn't it the case like all contextual languages can have an ambiguous grammar, unambiguous grammar? Like there are languages which will like there are contextual languages for which any grammar will be unambiguous.
Yeah. So I can't answer that question, right? Because yeah, I don't know whether or not there are languages such that any grammar for that language would be unambiguous. But when I say that unambiguity is a property of the grammar, right? I mean that uh, for a given language, right? You can have, for example, an ambiguous grammar, but you can also have an unambiguous grammar, right? So you can
Yes.
also have an unambiguous grammar, right? So that's what I mean, right? That that ambiguity, right, is basically related to multiple parse trees for the same string, right? So it's not exactly it's not it's so it's a property of the grammar itself, right? So it's not
Hmm.
a property of the language. That's what I meant, right? But I don't know whether or not there are languages, yeah, which have where all grammars are unambiguous.
Okay, so
Okay. Yeah, so the way that we show that all DCFLs have unambiguous context-free grammars is basically the procedure that we just saw, right? So in the last lecture, where to show this equivalence between PDAs and CFGs, right? So given a PDA, right, we constructed this context-free grammar. Uh, so the way we did this, right, was that we basically introduced the symbols in the context-free grammar in order to remove a particular stack symbol, right? We move from state P to Q. And so in fact, if you were to start that procedure, right, uh, yeah, so if you were to start that procedure and if so if you were to start that procedure from a deterministic PDA, right, and if you were to look at the grammar that you get, right, then the grammar that you will construct is actually going to be unambiguous. So which means that so if the PDA, so if a language, so if you have a DCFL, then it's going to have a deterministic PDA. Now from that deterministic PDA, I use the procedure to automatically construct this CFG, right? And the CFG that I get is going to be unambiguous, right? So again, you can sort of look back at that procedure and consider the grammar that you generate, right? And if the PDA is deterministic, right, then the CFG is going to be unambiguous, right? Because so the reason is that if the PDA is deterministic, then there is at most one sequence of moves, right, that you can use to construct the CFG, right? So if the PDA is deterministic, then so if the PDA is deterministic, can make if yeah, I'm sorry, I lost the connection again. Right? So yeah, so as I said, you can basically look at that procedure and you can consider the CFG that you generate. If you begin with a deterministic PDA, that's going to be unambiguous. However, notice that in that procedure, right, we considered the acceptance criterion of the initial PDA that we start from to be the empty stack empty acceptance criterion, right? So in fact, that's how we modeled the entire procedure, right? So we basically looked at this. So we basically generate non-terminals of the form PXQ, right? And then we said that start symbols, right, are going to be of the form Q0 bot P, right? So this is going to remove bot from the stack, right? Which means that the acceptance criteria of being empty stack, right, is sort of inbuilt, right, in the entire construction of this particular CFG, right? But as we just saw, right, that the class of languages that you can accept using the empty stack criterion for deterministic PDAs is very limited. Right? So in fact, these are only the languages which have the prefix property, right? And many regular languages also don't have this prefix property, right? So we cannot directly use this procedure, right? Because using this procedure, we cannot say then that every DCFL is going to have an unambiguous CFG, right? So only thing that we can say is that every DCFL which is accepted through the empty stack criterion is going to have an unambiguous CFG, right? So however, we can reuse that procedure. So we do this by adding a special end marker to all strings, right? So let's make this a bit more clear, right? So let's say that L is equal to LP for some DPDAP, okay? So LP, right, this is the notation that we use when we consider the acceptance criterion to be a final state, right? So, right, so you're given some DPDA, so you're given some language L, right? And you know that this language L is equal to L of P for some DPDAP, right? So this is the language that is accepted by the final state criterion for the DPDAP, right? So therefore, this is actually a DCFL, right? Then you can show that this L and this end marker, right? So this end marker, right, is another symbol, right? And this L end marker basically stands for the language where you basically append this end marker, right, at the end of all the strings in L. Okay? So this is another language that you get, right, by appending this end marker to all the strings in L. And we can show that this particular language, right, is actually going to be equal to n of p prime for some DPDA p prime. So this means that so for the language L itself, right, there may not exist a DPDA which would accept it by the empty stack criterion, right? So this is because if L has the prefix property, then there may be one. But if L does not have the prefix property, then there's definitely not going to be a DPDA that's going to accept it by the empty stack criterion, right? But if you just append this end marker, right, to all the strings in the language, then there definitely exists a DPDA p prime which is going to accept it through the empty stack criterion, right? So if you notice carefully, right, this L appended at the end if you append this at this end marker at the end, right? So this particular language actually has the prefix property, right? This is because this end marker itself is not part of the original alphabet, right? So and therefore it will definitely not happen, right, that two strings where X and Y, right, which are both in this L and end marker language, right, and just that X is a prefix of Y. So if L is a subset of the sigma star, right? So if you consider the alphabet to be sigma, right, then L is going to be a subset of sigma star, and we know that this end marker then does not belong to sigma, right? Which means that this particular language actually has the prefix property, right? And the way we can construct this particular DPDA p prime, right, is that we take the DPDA p, right, which is going to accept this language L through its empty stack, through the final state criterion rather, And then from all the final states of this particular DPDAP, I'm going to add a transition on this symbol, on the end marker symbol, to an erase state, right? And in this erase state, I'm simply going to remove. I'm simply going to add epsilon transitions which remove everything on the stack. Okay? So, right. So again, right. So this DPDAP, right, is accepting the language L through its through the final state criterion. So it has a bunch of final states. It may have a bunch of final states, right? And from every final state of P, I'm adding this transition on the end marker symbol to the erase state. Right? So there is a special erase state, and then this erase state is simply going to erase everything on the stack. So now, right, if you consider the language of this PDA, this DPDA P prime, right, so you can see that first of all, it is actually a DPDA, right? And it's basically going to accept exactly those strings which were accepted by the original DPDA P, but appended by this end marker symbol at the end. Okay. So remember that we want to show that every DCFL has an unambiguous CFG. Right? So we started with a DCFL, right? Which means that it's going to have a DPDA which accepts it through the final state criterion, and then we constructed this other language, this L appended with the end marker, for which we know that there exists a DPDA which accepts it through the empty stack criterion. Right? So now we can apply this procedure for converting this particular DPDA P prime to a CFG. Right? So we use the procedure to convert the DPDA P prime to the grammar G prime. Right? And we know that therefore this grammar is going to be unambiguous, right? Because this is still a DPDA, right? And now I can use the procedure because it is accepting, the acceptance criteria is empty stack. So therefore this grammar is going to be unambiguous, and the language of this grammar is going to be L along with appended by this end marker string, right? But we wanted an unambiguous grammar for this language L itself, right? Not for L appended by end marker. So for that, we basically simply add another set of production rules to this grammar G prime, where we are simply going to add epsilon transitions for, or rather we are going to add epsilon production rules for this particular end marker symbol. So we define another grammar G, which is the same as G prime, except that this end marker symbol becomes a non-terminal, right? So yeah, so except that, so this is wrong, right? So except that this end marker is a non-terminal, right? Is not a non-terminal. So this end marker symbol is a non-terminal now, and we add the production rule so we add epsilon production rule, right? So the end marker generates epsilon. So now since this end marker is no longer a terminal, right? So this means that in any particular derivation, right, of a string of this grammar, right, or a string in the language of this grammar, will have to use this particular production rule, this epsilon production rule, and therefore the language that will be accepted by this new grammar G, right, is exactly going to be L, right, and G is still unambiguous. Right? So that's how we can now. So this basically completes the proof, right, that every DCFL has an unambiguous CFG, right? So from the DCFL, I consider the CFL, rather I consider the DPDA, right, which accepts it through the final state criterion. From that I construct the DPDA which accepts it to the empty stack criterion. From that I construct this grammar G prime, and from that I construct the grammar G. So these are the sequence of steps that we can take to construct the unambiguous CFG from the given DCFL. Okay. So are there any questions regarding this part? Okay, so Vinny is asking that we did not prove that the CFG for the empty stack DPDA will be unambiguous. Yeah, so yeah, exactly. So we have not proved that formally. Right? So that's based on the procedure, right? So in fact, we have never actually shown how to prove that a particular how to at least formally prove that a particular CFG is unambiguous. Right? So we can only give informal sort of arguments, right? But the main idea is that the informal idea, right, is that this particular CFG, right, is constructed automatically using the procedure, right? And if you look at that procedure, right, the way it introduces the production rules, right? So if particular if you take a DPDA, right, then a string in the language of that DPDA is going to have is only going to have one move, right? One sequence of moves that you can make, and corresponding to that sequence of moves, you will have exactly one sequence of production rules, right, that you can use. Okay, any more questions? Okay, so Vineet is asking that, is there a class which contains a set of unambiguous grammars? Yeah, I don't know about that as well, right? So as we have established, right, so it's not the case that every language, right, which has an unambiguous grammar is a DCFL, right? So there could be languages which have an unambiguous CFG, but they may not be a DCFLs, right? So again, I don't know whether or not there is a class of languages which has an unambiguous CFG. Okay. Okay, so since I have a few more minutes, right, so let me begin the next topic. So I'll just briefly cover it. Okay, so let's look at the pumping lemma for CFLs. Right? So the objective of pumping lemma, right? So we saw pumping lemma for regular languages, and the objective of pumping lemma is to show that something is not in the class of languages, right? Is not in that particular class of languages, right? So in the case of the pumping lemma for regular languages, right, we basically use the contrapositive of the pumping lemma to show that there exist languages which don't which don't obey the pumping lemma, right? And therefore they are not regular languages. So similarly, here as well, right? We will define the pumping lemma, and then we will use its contrapositive to show that there are languages which are not CFLs. So it says that if there is a language which does not obey the pumping lemma, then it's not going to be a CFL, right? So not every language is a CFL, right? And we will use the pumping lemma to formally prove that some language is not a CFL. So if you recall the pumping lemma, so if you recall the pumping lemma for regular languages, right? So the way that we defined it, right, was that so we said that so the intuition behind this, right, was in terms of a DFA. Right? So if a language is regular, then there exists a DFA for that language, and if you have a long enough string, right, then in processing that string, since the number of states in the DFA is finite, right, you must visit some state multiple times, right? And and corresponding to the state that you visit multiple times, right, there exists a substring of a string of the original string, which you can pump as many times as you want, right? So there's going to be a cycle in the DFA for the language, and then we can pump the cycle, right? Which means that we can discover an infinite sequence of strings that has to be in the language. Now for CFLs, it will basically follow a very similar, the pumping lemma is going to follow a very similar structure, but it's going to be a little more complicated. Right? So instead of a single pump, right, so we will actually find two pieces of any sufficiently long string that we can pump, right? But we must pump them in tandem. Right? So if you take a long enough string, so if you start with a language, and if you take a long enough string in that language, then it's going to have two different substrings, right? And both of these substrings can be pumped in tandem in order to generate an infinite set of strings, which must also be in the language. So when we say that we need to pump in tandem, we mean that we must repeat each of those two pieces the same number of times. Right? So we can do this as many times as we want, and we will get another string, right? And all of those strings must be in the language. So let's look at the formal statement, right? And then we will end the lecture. Okay. So for every context-free language L, right? So if L is a context-free language, then there exists an integer n, such that if you take any string z that is in the language and that is long enough, right, which means that its length is greater than or equal to n, then I can break down this string z, right, into 5 different parts. Right? So I can break down this string z into 5 parts: u, v, w, x, and y. Right? So this u, v, w, x, and y are all substrings. Right? So they are substrings of z, such that z is exactly equal to this u, v, w, x, and y. Right? Right? And I can break down this string z, right, into u, v, w, x, and y, following some criterion, right? So the criterion is that this length of VWX, so this VWX is the middle part of the string, is the middle part of Z, right? So this VWX, the length of VWX must be less than or equal to n, right? Where n is the original number that I started with, right? And moreover, this V and X, right? So if I just look at V and X, this particular string V and X must not be empty, which means that its length must be greater than 0. Okay. So any of this u, v, w, x, and y can be empty, which means they can be epsilon, but v and x together cannot be epsilon. So so the length of v and x must be greater than 0. So if I can break down, so there exists some way in which I can break down this string z, right, into u, v, w, x, and y, such that we obey this criterion, and then I'm basically going to pump this v and x together. So I can say that for all I greater than or equal to 0, this u, v to the power I, w, x to the power I, y is also in L. Right? So with both v and x, right, are basically pumped in tandem, right? And which means I can repeat them as many times as I want, but I must repeat them both together. Right? So if I repeat v I times, then I must also repeat x I times. Right? So again, right? So this the CFL pumping lemma is saying that if you start with a context-free language, if you take a long enough string in that language, then I can break down that long enough string into 5 different parts, right? And such that the length of the middle part VWX is less than or equal to n, and v and x are both not empty, and then I can pump both v and x as many times as I want, right? But in tandem, and all of the resulting strings will also be in the language. So Vinit is saying that this statement is stronger than the pumping lemma. So I don't know what do you mean by stronger. As in, we can take w and x equal to epsilon. Yes. Yes, that is correct, right? So that is correct. But remember that it's not a choice, right? So this pumping lemma is saying that there exists some way in which you can break down this string u, v, w, this string z, right, into u, v, w, x, and y. Right? So it's not like you can take any choice of this v, w, and x, right, and the particular and then you can pump those, right? So there will exist some way in which you can break down the string. So it's not like you can break down the string in any arbitrary way. So in fact, so as I said, right, we are not actually going to use the pumping lemma in this form, right? So we'll use its contrapositive in order to show that some particular language is not a CFL. Okay. Okay, so does this statement hold for regular languages as well? Yeah, so yeah, obviously, yeah. So it should, right? Because every CFL is a regular language. So, and we know that the pumping lemma for regular languages, right, should therefore hold, right, for every CFL as well. But we cannot.
I was saying the
Sorry.
Will this pumping lemma for CFL also hold for regular languages?
Yes, it will hold, right? Because every CFL is a regular language. So is that clear? Because so the pumping lemma for regular languages says that if a language is regular, right, then I can sort of then there exists this number n, right, this integer n, such that there exists if you consider any string of length greater than or equal to n, then there will exist some substring that I can pump as many times as I want, right? And since every CFL, right, so if L is a CFL, then L is also regular, right? Which means that therefore the pumping lemma for regular languages will also hold. So you can, so if you take any long enough string, right? So then okay, so I think so every regular language is a CFL.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, every regular language is a CFL, right? So so yes, so that's why this will hold, right? So for if you take a regular language,
You can construct a CFL for it.
yeah, then
Now
this
that
lemma
CFL
for
shows this
CFL,
property.
sorry.
If you have a regular language, we can
Yes.
create a CFL for it.
Yes,
Now,
exactly.
if we have a CFL, then it
Yeah.
should follow this property. That means a regular language, in a regular language also, we can get two strings, like we can get U, V, W, X, Y, such that we can pump V and X in tandem. Like, is this the case that we can we can apply this to regular languages as well?
Mm,
So with a regular language, we can create a CFL.
so if okay, so let's start. So you're asking that does this statement hold for a regular language, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so but yeah, so every regular language is also a CFL. So so that's why this particular pumping lemma is going to hold for a regular language as well, right?
Hmm.
So I think it's the, yeah, I think, yeah, then that's clear, right?
So, okay, this statement holds for regular languages.
Yes, this
Now,
language, yeah, yeah.
is it the case that that statement also holds for contextual languages that we can have UVW such that we can pump V and V again?
No, that doesn't hold, right? Because I mean, as we saw, right? So that's how we proved that a language is not regular, right? So we took a language, right? So the 0 and 1 n, for example, does not obey the pumping lemma for regular languages, right? But it's a CFL. So that's why it's going to obey this pumping lemma for CFLs. So we'll show that there are languages which doesn't obey this particular pumping lemma for CFLs as well.
So, but if
Yeah.
it if in this theorem, if we put W and X to be epsilon,
No, that's what I'm saying, right? So it's not your choice, right? That you can put W and X to be epsilon, right? So there exists some way in which I can break this.
okay,
Yeah.
okay,
It's not saying that for every choice of W, VW, and X, this should hold.
yes, sir, yes, sir.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So yeah, let's end the lecture there.